For my case study for accident investigation, AV 6340, I'm doing kind of a personal experience and a little bit different case. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to give some background information on first. The main video that I focused on from the Aviation Safety Institute was about a pilot who flew from VFR to IMC conditions, and the video discussed hazardous attitudes as most likely being the main contributing factor to the crash. He ended up in a spatial disorientation situation, and basically his airplane fell apart in the air, and there was a 1,000-foot by 800-feet debris area and plane in multiple parts. And then in investigating his past, he had had multiple issues with hazardous attitudes, including getting his certificate revoked for 120 days. And hazardous attitudes is one of the things that I probably dig a little more into in our drone courses. I try to emphasize, and the video did this for a second, but tried to emphasize that everybody deals with hazardous attitudes every day. Whether it's all 5 of them, just one of them, whether it's a huge thing, a minor thing, whatever, we all deal with them all the time. And one of the examples that I try to give students is actually a personal one. So I tell this story after they've gotten to know me quite a bit, and they've seen me fly, they've seen me build airplanes, they've seen me fly drones, they've heard me talk about and actually enact or model flight crew safety and checklists and all that kind of stuff. So they know at this point in time, hopefully, that I try to be a good, responsible drone pilot, whether it's flying RC for fun, flying a regular mission, doing some photography, whatever I'm doing. So when we get to the hazardous attitude section, I tell them that the main hazardous attitude I personally have always struggled with is resignation. And I tell them a story about the very first flight test foam board aircraft that I built. And I remember being out flying it. This was, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. And I was on probably about my 4th flight with this aircraft, and it flew great. It was a high wing, it was a trainer, nice and slow, totally fine, but I hadn't really mastered landing, still haven't mastered landing, but I always joke with students, I've been flying RC airplanes for 20 years, I've only been landing for 10. Landing has been kind of a roadblock for me, and unfortunately has transferred to my glider piloting as well. And there was one time that I was flying this RC airplane, frustrated as all get out with landing, and it was probably 6 feet above the ground, maybe, yeah, 6 feet above the ground. My stepson was next to me, and I couldn't get it to come down. I threw the transmitter to the ground and walked away while the airplane was still in the air. Literally quit flying it right then and there. And luckily, I mean, it was an RC airplane, didn't crash. I mean, it did, but it wasn't bad or anything like that. This airplane can handle pretty much any type of crash, except for the one I'm going to talk about in this presentation. But anyway, those experiences combined with the Aviation Safety Institute video I saw kind of led me to do a little bit different case study in focusing on a UAS mid-air collision. So this collision happened in March of 2024 this year in St. George, Utah, at an RC field called Remote Possibilities. It's a field that my husband has been going to for over 20 years. He and I have been members of this club for over a decade together, and this President's Day Fun Fly is when this midair collision happened. And side note, Matt, I'm going to tell you right now, you know both of these pilots. So anyway, it's going to be kind of funny for you. Okay, UAS mid-air collision case study investigation, March 2024. So Remote Possibilities has what's called a President's Day Fun Fly every year. It's been happening for well over 45 years. Hundreds of participants go to it. From all around the nation. And it's something that, like I said, my husband, I don't think he's missed one in 20 years. It's been at a couple of different model airports, and I've been at least 10 times. It's a huge open area out in the desert. We have a well-marked, well-kept, paved model airport. No, this is not a picture of it. But we do have a very, very nice RC airport, and um, huge paved runway, awesome spectator section, pavilions, turf grass everywhere for comfort and all that kind of stuff. It's a really nice airport. And each time they have the President's Day Fun Fly, we have extreme flight, 3D flight, air shows, multiple pilots up there at a time. Yes, there's a mid-air collision every single year, at least one. And a buddy of mine is typically involved in them. But these two pilots were involved this year. And it was one that I wanted to talk about because the two pilots are Brad Worston and Austin Washke. Brad Worston, yes, the extreme 3D manned pilot that flies, I think, an Extra and an SBOC. I can't remember. Anyway, and Austin Washke, the student that I have had in class, a student that is actually the president of the Bridgerland RC Club. He works for Aggie Air. And those were the only two pilots in the air at the time of this mid-air collision, which, again, Matt, you know both of these guys, and you probably are not surprised. Anyway, only two pilots in the air. You got to talk about experience for both of them. So Brad Worston is a very experienced 3D pilot, both manned and unmanned. He's also an extremely experienced builder. We're talking at least 15 years of both manned and unmanned flight and building time. Austin has probably about 5 years worth of experience. I remember when he started flying 3D. He really jumped into it. He was down here in Price for a little bit as a student and had classes with B-Dub. And then he went back up to Logan to finish his bachelor's degree and ended up working for Aggie Air. He's got experience as a safety officer and a president for the RC Club up there. The situation itself, the President's Day Fun Fly hadn't quite started yet. It was a day or two before, and during the actual fun fly, there are several safety officers up along the flight line. You absolutely have to have a spotter, whether other pilots are up there or not. They're very strict about communication. You fly in the pattern. Yes, RC airports have as much of a pattern as manned do, and we used to, back in the day, especially when I very first started flying RC, basically had to do it just like manned. You had to have a discovery flight, you had to have hours with an instructor. That's how my husband and I met. And Brad knows that past. Austin does not. Austin has gotten into RC after that, because back in the day you couldn't just buy an RC airplane and start flying it like you can now. You had to actually build it and learn how to use it. But now they are extremely easy to learn how to fly, and that's where Austin's coming from. The attitudes, both pilots, his huge machoism issues, huge invulnerability issues for both of them. I would even argue probably for Austin a bit of resignation happens quite often as well, and if you've had him as a student, you know that. Brad, you know him. He's a huge show-off, very anti-authority, very machoism issues. The two aircraft that they had were actually foam aircraft. I put a picture of the biplane in here because the last time I was at the President's Day Fun Fly with Brad, he crashed his 47% Pitts into a bluff in St. George just because he was flying out of the pattern. And same thing happened here. Both Brad and Austin were out of the pattern. They were just flying around like crazy, and both had fairly cheap foam airplanes. I say cheap, they were under $1,000. They're both between 48 and 60 inch wingspan, so fly around pretty easily. Timeline, Brad and Austin arrived early. They got out some cheap aircraft, and again, I use the term cheap loosely. They were very good aircraft. They just weren't thousands of dollars or anything like that. The two pilots had a real quick discussion. Hey, let's go up. Yeah, all right, sweet, let's go. Throw them up. No pattern, no spotter, no plan whatsoever. Just kind of dorking around. The midair collision happened pretty quickly. It was the first one, and again, only 2 pilots in the air. The extra that Austin Washke was flying was completely destroyed. That's not a picture of it, but that's about what it looked like. And then the T-28, those are dang good RC airplanes. It was very fixable. The foam was easy to replace and all that kind of fun stuff. So Brad's was okay-ish. I think he still threw it away though. But the midair collision kind of set what happened for the rest of Remote Possibilities President's Day Fun Fly, actually, because the safety officers were a lot more strict after that, and there was not another midair collision at that one. This is kind of what a midair collision can look like. It's a little bit of a low grain image, obviously, but typically at that fun fly, midair collisions happen when somebody gets out of the pattern. An example, a buddy of mine had a, I don't know, 102 inch, I think, extra that he was flying, and somebody else decided to get out of the pattern and do a straight vertical just for no reason, and hit my friend and split his airplane in half. It came crashing down and when it smashed into the ground, it was a million pieces, and this other pilot walks away. Oh man, mine wasn't hurt. That's great, and walks away from it. It's kind of disheartening, but that's what can happen. So in retrospect, kind of like the Aircraft Institute, Safety Institute video, the number one thing was Remote Possibilities established rules. They need to be followed. They need to be standardized, which they do follow AMA's guidelines, the Academy of Model Aeronautics, but the pilots need to follow Remote Possibilities rules. The pilots also need to remember aircraft capabilities. The extra is a lot more aerobatic than a T-28. You can force the T-28 to do things, and Brad would, but keep those in mind, those aircraft capabilities. They may have extended outside of the envelope of one of the aircraft. Situational awareness, just, yeah, they're the only 2 pilots in the sky, but make sure you know what the other person is doing, and when they're going to pull up, when they're going to roll inverted, when they're going to loop, whatever. Maintain that. And then hazardous attitudes, definitely huge. There was invulnerability and machoism involved in this one for both pilots, and that was probably the number one contributing factor, and again, why I focused on the video that I did and on this specific case study. What we can learn from this, we need to be able to follow those Academy of Model Aeronautics rules, and then just communication really is huge. Obviously address your hazardous attitudes, but talk while you're at the flight line, have a plan before you take off, and communicate it. RC flight in general is obviously meant to be fun. It's meant to test your skills as a pilot. There are a lot of competitions. The world of RC flight is absolutely huge. Both of these pilots are very experienced and kind of, knee deep or eyeball deep even into the whole RC pilot thing. It is a lot of fun. But understanding your aircraft's capability is just as important in RC flight as it is in manned. Addressing your hazardous attitudes is just as important in RC flight as manned, and communicating is just as important in RC flight as manned, so that everybody can have a good time. Anyway, that is kind of a little bit different case study, and I hope it works. And I did like the Aviation Safety Institute videos. Those were good and kind of stuck with me. My husband watched them with me too, and you just feel kind of sick for that pilot and the hazardous attitudes issues.